No one had ever dared to touch Mrs. Han, the wife of Korea's most feared Mafia billionaire. Not the managers, not the guards, not even the police. Yet a black chef with flour on her hands had just slapped her across the face. The wine glass fell, the guards reached for their guns, and somewhere upstairs, the Mafia boss was watching everything. The Golden Dragon restaurant wasn't just a restaurant. It was a kingdom disguised as luxury dining. Politicians came here, celebrities came here, men with power whispered deals behind closed doors. But the real owner of the building was Han Seo-jin, a billionaire whose empire stretched from shipping companies to private security firms and darker things no one spoke about. Everyone feared him, but the person people feared even more was his wife, Madame Han. Elegant, beautiful, and cruel in ways that made employees tremble whenever her heels echoed through the hall. For months, the kitchen staff had suffered under her insults. Plates thrown, workers fired, humiliation served daily like the restaurant's special menu. But one person refused to bow. Amara Johnson, the new head chef, a woman whose food could make millionaires cry, but whose patience had finally run out. That night, Madame Han stormed into the kitchen again. She didn't like the presentation of her meal, so she grabbed the plate and threw it. The porcelain shattered beside a young dishwasher's feet. Then she grabbed the girl's arm, hard. And that was the moment Amara moved. Before anyone could breathe, slap. The sound echoed across the marble kitchen, and every single person in the room thought the same thing. She just signed her death sentence, because everyone knew one rule: you never touch the wife of Han Seo-jin.
Before we continue, we welcome you to Afro-Korean Love Thrillers, the home of dark romance, forbidden passion, power, betrayal, and captivating revenge stories. Please do me a favor. Tap that comment section and tell us quickly where you are watching from. Stay tuned. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any new thriller that drops here. Sit back and relax because this story is just getting started. Now let's get back to our story.
The sound of the slap cracked through the kitchen like a gunshot. For a moment, the entire Golden Dragon restaurant stopped breathing. Knives hovered above cutting boards, steam continued to rise from boiling pots, but the chefs holding the ladles had frozen mid-motion. Even the clatter of plates from the dining hall beyond the swinging doors seemed to fade away. Every pair of eyes in the kitchen turned toward the center of the room, toward Amara Johnson, and toward the woman she had just slapped. Madame Han stood perfectly still. Her head had turned slightly from the force of the strike. A strand of her perfectly styled hair had fallen across her cheek, the pale skin beneath it slowly flushing red. For 3 long seconds, no one moved. Then, the panic began. 2 security guards stationed near the service entrance rushed forward instantly, their polished shoes pounding against the tile floor. "Grab her!" one of them barked. Several kitchen workers gasped and stepped back, bumping into stainless steel counters and stacks of plates. The young dishwasher girl, who had been crying moments earlier, now stared in pure horror, her hands trembling around the broken pieces of porcelain still on the floor. The restaurant manager, a thin man whose expensive suit was already damp with sweat, hurried toward Amara with wide eyes. His voice dropped into a horrified whisper. "Do you even know who she is?" But Amara didn't answer. Her chest rose and fell steadily. Flour still dusted across her hands from the bread dough she had been kneading moments before. Across from her, Madame Han slowly turned her head back. Her gaze lifted. Cold. Sharp. Dangerous. The kitchen lights reflected in her dark eyes as she touched her cheek lightly, feeling the heat where Amara's hand had struck her. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but it carried through the entire room. You just signed your death sentence." The words dropped into the kitchen like ice. The guards were already moving. One grabbed Amara's arm roughly, while the other reached for her shoulder, twisting her away from the counter. Several cooks turned their heads away, unable to watch. Everyone in the room knew the same terrifying truth. No one touched the wife of Han Se-jin, not if they wanted to keep breathing. The manager's voice shook as he backed away. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" Madame Han straightened her jacket slowly, regaining her perfect composure, as if the slap had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Then she pointed at Amara. "Take her to the office," she said coldly. "I want her fired before she leaves this building." The guards tightened their grip. Amara didn't struggle, but she didn't look afraid either, which somehow made the room even quieter. One of the security guards reached for his radio clipped to his belt. Static crackled suddenly through the device. Then a voice came through. Calm, clear, and instantly recognizable to everyone who worked in the building. "The boss is watching." The guard froze. So did the manager. And slowly, every head in the kitchen turned upward toward the small black security camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. The words from the radio hung in the air like a silent command. "The boss is watching." No one spoke. The guards who had grabbed Amara hesitated, their hands still gripping her arms but no longer pulling her toward the office. The manager's face drained of color as his eyes slowly lifted toward the small black camera fixed high in the corner of the kitchen. Everyone in the room knew exactly who that voice belonged to. Han Se-jin. Even Madame Han seemed to pause for a brief moment before smoothing the sleeve of her elegant jacket again, her posture stiff with offended pride. "Why are you standing there?" she snapped sharply at the guards. "Take her away!" The guards exchanged a quick glance, but they did not move. Instead, they tightened their circle around Amara. Security surrounded her from every side now. 3 guards, then 4. Their presence filled the kitchen like a closing wall. The staff watched in tense silence, waiting for what came next. Everyone expected the same thing. A plea, an apology, tears. That was how these things usually ended. But Amara Johnson did none of those things. Instead, she calmly pulled her hands free just enough to brush the flour from her palms. The white dust drifted down toward the floor as she wiped them slowly against her apron. Her face remained steady, unshaken. When she finally spoke, her voice was clear enough for every person in the kitchen to hear. Someone needed to remind her she can't treat people like animals. A sharp wave of gasps swept through the room. One cook dropped a ladle that clattered loudly against the tile. The manager staggered a step forward, his eyes wide with panic. "Stop talking, please!" he whispered urgently. His voice trembled like a man trying to stop a disaster that had already begun. But Amara didn't stop. She didn't even look at him. Her gaze remained locked on Madame Han. Then, slowly, she lifted her hand and pointed across the kitchen, toward the small figure standing beside the sink. The terrified dishwasher girl. The girl's eyes were swollen from crying, her hands still shaking as she clutched a towel to her chest. "Ask her what your wife did," Amara said firmly. All eyes turned toward the girl. Madame Han's expression hardened immediately. "You dare accuse me?" she said coldly. But before anyone could speak again, something strange happened. The faint mechanical hum of motors echoed softly from above. One camera, then another, then another. The security cameras mounted along the kitchen ceiling began to move. Slowly, one by one, they rotated on their mounts until their dark lenses pointed directly toward the center of the room, toward Amara, toward Madame Han, toward the trembling dishwasher girl. The manager stared upward in disbelief. The guards followed the movement with uneasy expressions. Every camera had turned. All of them. Watching. Recording. And everyone in the room suddenly understood the same chilling truth. Someone upstairs was watching very closely. Upstairs, far above the heat and tension of the kitchen, the private office of Han Se-jin was quiet. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the glittering skyline outside, but the lights of the city barely touched the dark interior of the room. Most of the illumination came from a long wall of security monitors. Every screen showed a different angle of the Golden Dragon restaurant. Dining hall, private VIP rooms, hallways, and the kitchen. On the largest monitor in the center, the kitchen confrontation played out in perfect clarity. Han Se-jin sat in a leather chair, one leg crossed over the other, his expression unreadable as the footage replayed the moment again. The slap, the shock on every face, the guards surrounding the chef. Behind him, 3 men stood stiffly near the desk, advisors who had worked with him for years, men who had witnessed his temper before and understood what usually followed moments like this. They were waiting for it now. The explosion, the command, the punishment. Instead, the room remained silent. Se-jin leaned slightly forward, resting his fingers together as he watched the scene unfold on the screens. His dark eyes followed every movement carefully. The chef standing tall, his wife's furious expression, the frightened staff. But there was something different in his gaze. Not anger, interest. One of the advisors finally shifted uneasily and cleared his throat. "Sir," he said cautiously. Se-jin did not look away from the monitor. The advisor continued, his voice tight with nervousness. "Sir, should we remove the chef?" The other men glanced toward their boss, expecting the immediate answer, because the outcome seemed obvious. No one struck the wife of Han Se-jin and continued breathing. But Se-jin simply watched the screen a few seconds longer. Then he spoke. Quietly. No. The single word settled over the room like a weight. The advisor blinked in confusion. Se-jin's gaze remained fixed on the footage as the guards surrounded Amara. A small pause passed. Then he added calmly, "Let it continue." Behind him, the advisors exchanged uncertain looks. On the screen, Amara wiped the flour from her hands. The audio carried her voice clearly through the speakers. Someone needed to remind her she can't treat people like animals. One advisor inhaled sharply, but Se-jin didn't react. His eyes narrowed slightly. Not in anger, in curiosity. After a moment, he reached for the small control panel on the table beside him. His finger pressed a button. The screen stopped. The figure flickered. Then the video began moving backward. The slap rewound. The guard stepping forward reversed. Madame Han's head straightened before the impact. But Se-jin didn't stop there. The footage continued moving backward, past the confrontation, past the raised voices, past the moment Amara stepped forward. The advisor frowned slightly, because Se-jin wasn't studying the slap at all. He was watching something else. The seconds before it happened. The moment when a plate shattered across the kitchen floor, and when Madame Han's hand grabbed the young dishwasher's arm. Se-jin leaned slightly forward in his chair. His eyes sharpened as the scene replayed again. Not the slap, but what happened before it. The kitchen remained frozen beneath the silent stare of the security cameras. No one moved. The guards still surrounded Amara, their hands firm on her arms, though their earlier confidence had faded into hesitation. The manager stood nearby, his face pale as he kept glancing nervously toward the cameras above. Everyone understood what it meant now. The boss was watching, and that meant every word spoken in the kitchen mattered. Amara didn't take her eyes off Madame Han, but the person she had pointed to, the young dishwasher girl, looked like she wished the floor would swallow her whole. She stood beside the sink, clutching a damp towel in both hands, her knuckles white. Her shoulders trembled as dozens of eyes turned toward her. Madame Han followed their gaze slowly. The elegant woman's lips curled into a thin, dangerous smile. "Well," she said, her voice smooth but sharp, "is there something you'd like to say?" The girl's mouth opened, then closed again. Fear flickered across her face. Everyone in the kitchen knew the consequences of speaking against Madame Han. Jobs could disappear. Lives could be ruined. The manager took a small step toward the girl, shaking his head almost imperceptibly. "Don't." But Amara spoke gently. "It's okay," she said. The girl looked at her, and somehow that small moment of reassurance gave her enough courage. Her voice came out soft and shaky at first. "Madame Han, she grabbed my arm." The room seemed to shrink around the words. The girl swallowed hard before continuing. "She said the plate wasn't clean enough. I told her I had already washed it twice, but—" Her voice cracked. "But she threw it." She gestured weakly toward the broken porcelain still scattered across the floor. "And when I tried to pick it up, she grabbed me." The kitchen fell completely silent. Even the low hum of the refrigerators seemed louder now. Every employee in the room knew the girl was telling the truth. They had seen it, but no one had dared to say it. Madame Han stared at the trembling girl for a long moment. Then suddenly, she laughed, a cold, amused sound that echoed through the kitchen. "So the servants are telling stories now," she said lightly. Her eyes shifted toward Amara. "How interesting." The laughter vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Her expression hardened again, turning icy. Madame Han turned toward the guards. "Fire them all." Her voice was calm. Absolute. The chef, the girl, anyone who supports them. The manager sucked in a sharp breath. "Madame Han, perhaps we should—" She raised a hand without even looking at him. "Did you not hear me?" The guards shifted uneasily. None of them moved, because the cameras were still watching, and the boss was still upstairs. The tension stretched across the room like a tightening wire. Then, suddenly, the heavy kitchen doors at the far end of the room creaked open. Slowly. Every head turned. The room seemed to hold its breath as a tall shadow appeared in the doorway. Someone had arrived. The kitchen doors swung open fully, and the room seemed to lose what little air remained inside it. Han So-jin stepped through the doorway. He didn't hurry. He didn't speak. Yet the moment his polished shoes touched the tile floor, the atmosphere in the kitchen changed completely. Fear moved through the room like a silent wave. Every staff member instinctively lowered their head. Knives were placed down. Conversations died before they began. Even the guards surrounding Amara straightened immediately. No one in the Golden Dragon restaurant needed to be told who he was. Han So-jin. The man who owned the building. The man who owned half the city. The man people whispered about but rarely dared to mention out loud. He walked slowly into the kitchen, his dark suit perfectly tailored, his expression calm in a way that somehow made the tension worse. His eyes swept across the room once, taking in everything. The broken plate on the floor, the frightened dishwasher girl, the guards gripping Amara's arms, and finally, his wife, Madame Han moved quickly toward him, her earlier anger melting instantly into wounded elegance, her hand lifted lightly to her cheek, still faintly red from the slap. "Darling," she said softly, her voice filled with carefully crafted distress. She gestured toward Amara without even looking at her. "This woman assaulted me." The words hung in the air like a verdict already decided. Several employees lowered their heads even further. Everyone expected the same outcome. The guards would drag the chef away, security would handle the rest. No one in the Golden Dragon restaurant needed to be told who he was. No one struck the wife of Han So-jin and remained employed, or alive. But So-jin didn't immediately react. Instead, he looked around the kitchen again. His gaze paused briefly on the trembling dishwasher girl. Then it settled on Amara. The guards holding her arms shifted nervously under his stare. So-jin stepped closer. Close enough now that Amara could see the sharp focus in his dark eyes. For a moment, the room was completely silent. Then he asked a single question. "Why did you slap my wife?" A ripple of shock passed through the kitchen. The question wasn't angry, it wasn't shouted, it was calm. And somehow, that made it far more terrifying. Everyone turned toward Amara, waiting. The manager's heart pounded so loudly he was sure someone would hear it. The guards tightened their grip on her arms as if expecting her to collapse or beg. But Amara didn't look down. She met Han So-jin's gaze directly. Her voice was steady. Because someone had to. The words landed in the center of the room like a stone dropped into still water. The guards reacted instantly. Their grip tightened painfully around her arms. One of them muttered under his breath, clearly preparing to drag her away. But before they could move, Han So-jin raised his hand. Just slightly. A simple gesture. The guards froze. Every movement in the kitchen stopped again. And slowly, Han So-jin lowered his hand. Han Se-jin's raised hand remained in the air for a moment longer before he slowly lowered it. The guards instantly released some of the pressure on Amara's arms, though they still stood close beside her. No one in the kitchen dared to move unless the boss said so. Han Se-jin's gaze moved calmly across the room. The frightened staff, the trembling dishwasher girl, the broken porcelain still scattered across the floor. Finally, he spoke. "Everyone out." The words were quiet, but absolute. The manager blinked in confusion. "Sir?" Se-jin didn't repeat himself. He simply looked toward the door. Within seconds, the kitchen exploded into movement. Chefs hurried out, waiters slipped past the counters, and even some of the security staff stepped away quickly, eager to escape the suffocating tension. Only a few people remained. The guards holding Amara, the dishwasher girl, the restaurant manager, Madame Han, and Se-jin. The kitchen suddenly felt much larger without the crowd, yet the air inside it seemed heavier than before. Se-jin walked toward a wall where a small monitor had been mounted beneath the security cameras. One of the guards quickly activated it. The footage from earlier appeared on the screen. The kitchen scene, the argument, the plate. Se-jin watched silently as the video replayed. No one dared to speak. On the screen, Madame Han's hand appeared, grabbing the dishwasher girl's arm roughly. Then the plate shattered across the floor. Then Amara stepped forward. The slap followed seconds later. Se-jin watched the sequence once, then again. Finally, he turned away from the monitor. His gaze moved slowly toward his wife. Madame Han stood tall, but the perfect composure she usually carried seemed slightly less certain now. Se-jin studied her face. Then he asked quietly, "Is this true?" The question seemed simple, but in the silent kitchen it carried enormous weight. Madame Han opened her mouth immediately, then stopped. For the first time since the confrontation began, hesitation crossed her expression. Her eyes flickered briefly toward the dishwasher girl, toward Amara, then back to her husband. "It's ridiculous," she said finally, though her voice was no longer as confident as before. "The girl exaggerated. These people always do." Sejin said nothing. He simply continued looking at her. Seconds passed. The silence stretched longer. Then suddenly, he spoke again, his voice colder this time. "Apologize." The word dropped into the room like a stone. Everyone reacted at once. The manager turned quickly toward Amara. The guards shifted, assuming the boss had finally decided her punishment. Even the dishwasher girl looked toward the chef, expecting her to see her forced to kneel, because that was the only thing that made sense. But Amara didn't move, because Han Se-jin wasn't looking at her. He was looking directly at Madame Han, and his voice did not change when he repeated the command. "Apologize." For a moment after Han Se-jin's command, the kitchen stood perfectly still. "Apologize." The word echoed between the stainless steel counters. Madame Han stared at him. At first, it looked as if she hadn't understood what he meant. Her elegant face remained frozen, her dark eyes searching his expression as if waiting for him to clarify. But Se-jin didn't clarify. He simply stood there, calm and unmoving, his gaze fixed on her. The meaning slowly settled in, and when it did, Madame Han's composure shattered. "You're humiliating me for a chef?" Her voice exploded through the kitchen, sharp with disbelief and fury. The manager flinched. The guards stiffened. Madame Han's eyes burned as she turned toward Amara, the rage in her expression no longer hidden behind polite smiles or cold elegance. "For her?" she demanded. Then she moved. Her heels struck the floor as she stormed forward, closing the distance between herself and Amara in seconds. "You think you can raise your hand against me and walk away?" she snapped. The guards instinctively tightened their hold on Amara again, unsure what was about to happen. But Madame Han didn't slow down. Her hand lifted as if she intended to strike Amara back. Before she could reach her, Se-jin stepped forward. One smooth movement. He placed himself directly between them. Madame Han stopped abruptly. For a moment, they stood only inches apart. The room became ice cold. No one spoke. The dishwasher girl clutched the towel in her hands, barely breathing. The manager's eyes darted nervously between husband and wife, terrified of what might happen next. Madame Han looked up at Se-jin, her anger now mixed with something darker. Disbelief. "You're choosing her side?" she demanded. Se-jin didn't answer. His expression remained calm, but the quiet authority in his stance made it clear that he would not move aside. That was when something in Madame Han's eyes shifted. The fury changed, turned sharper, more personal. "You always defend them," she said bitterly. The words came out slower now. He still didn't react. Then she added something that no one in the room expected, something that made the air itself seem to freeze. "Just like you defended your mother." The sentence hung in the air. For a second, no one moved. The guards' grips loosened slightly in shock. The manager stared at the floor as if suddenly very interested in the tiles, and Se-jin, for the first time since entering the kitchen, did not look calm. The entire room froze. The words hung in the kitchen like a crack of thunder. "Just like you defended your mother." No one moved. Even the guards seemed to forget they were holding Amara as the sentence settled heavily over the room. The dishwasher girl stared wide-eyed between Madame Han and Se-jin, sensing she had just witnessed something far more dangerous than the earlier confrontation. For the first time since he entered the kitchen, Han Se-jin's calm expression shifted. Not with anger, with something older, quieter. Madame Han watched him carefully, as if waiting for the reaction she expected. Rage, perhaps, or a sharp command that would restore her authority in front of the staff. But Han Se-jin didn't explode. He simply exhaled slowly. Then he turned his gaze away from her. His eyes moved across the kitchen instead, across the stainless steel counters, the cutting boards, the sinks, the broken plates still lying on the floor. Places that looked polished and expensive now, but which, to him, clearly carried a different memory. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm again. "My mother worked in a restaurant like this." The sentence surprised everyone. The manager lifted his head slightly, confused. Seo-jin continued, his gaze distant, as if seeing something that wasn't in the room. She wasn't the owner's wife. His eyes moved toward the dishwasher girl. She washed dishes, then toward the stoves. She cleaned tables, then toward the floor. And sometimes she scrubbed the kitchen after everyone else went home. No one dared interrupt. Madame Han folded her arms, though the tension in her posture was no longer hidden. Seo-jin's voice remained steady, but the customers who came there were rich. He paused. And some of them believed money meant they could treat workers however they wanted. The dishwasher girl lowered her gaze, because she understood that part of the story too well. Seo-jin's eyes darkened slightly. No one defended her. The words came out softer this time. For a moment, the kitchen felt smaller, more personal. Then he continued, until one night, a chef did. He turned slightly, his gaze landing on Amara. That chef saved her dignity. The guards holding Amara loosened their grip completely now, almost without realizing it. Seo-jin studied Amara for a long second. Then he said quietly, "Tonight, you did the same." The room fell silent again. The manager blinked in shock. The dishwasher girl stared at Amara with wide eyes. Even Madame Han looked briefly unsettled. Because the meaning behind those words was unmistakable. Seo-jin was not condemning the chef. He was acknowledging her. But before anyone could react, Seo-jin added something else. His voice still calm, still controlled, yet carrying a weight that made the room tense again. Which makes this situation complicated. The words lingered in the kitchen long after Seo-jin finished speaking. Which makes this situation complicated. No one dared respond. The silence stretched across the room as if the air itself had thickened. The guards had loosened their grip on Amara completely now, though they still stood close beside her. The manager wiped sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. Everyone was waiting for the decision. Madame Han stood stiffly across from her husband, her expression caught somewhere between anger and disbelief. She had expected the story about his mother to end with him regaining control of the room. Instead, it had shifted the balance. Now the kitchen felt like a courtroom, and Seo-jin was the judge. Seconds passed. Then he moved. Seo-jin stepped forward slowly, his gaze sweeping across the room one more time. The dishwasher girl. The broken plate. The nervous staff. Finally, he spoke. His voice calm, steady. "From today, my wife will no longer control the staff." For a moment, the words didn't seem to register. Then shock spread across the kitchen like a ripple through still water. The manager's mouth fell open. One of the cooks near the door covered his mouth in shock. Even the dishwasher girl let out a small, shaky breath, because everyone in that room believed the same thing, that Amara Johnson would not leave the kitchen with her job, or worse. But Seo-jin wasn't finished. His gaze remained on Amara. The silence returned. Then he spoke again, and the next words stunned everyone in the room. "You're being promoted." The manager straightened instantly. The guards exchanged confused glances. The dishwasher girl's eyes widened in disbelief. Even Madame Han seemed momentarily speechless, because nothing about this decision made sense. Not in a world where striking the wife of Han Seo-jin should have meant immediate destruction. Yet here he was, promoting the woman who had done it. And Seo-jin hadn't even explained why. The kitchen slowly began to empty. At first, no one seemed willing to move. The staff stood frozen, still trying to process what had just happened. A chef being promoted after slapping the wife of Han Se-jin was not something anyone in the Golden Dragon restaurant had ever imagined witnessing. But eventually, people began slipping out. The manager quietly ushered the dishwasher girl toward the door, whispering reassurances as they left. The guards stepped away from Amara, casting uncertain glances towards Se-jin before following the others out. Madame Han was the last to leave. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, her eyes locked on her husband with a mixture of anger and disbelief. But Se-jin didn't look at her, and eventually she turned and walked away. The doors closed behind her. Silence settled over the kitchen. The hum of refrigerators and the soft hiss of steam from the stoves filled the empty space. Only 2 people remained, Amara Johnson and Han Se-jin. He stood near the center of the kitchen, his hands loosely behind his back, studying her carefully now that the room was quiet. Amara leaned lightly against the counter, her arms crossing over her chest as she returned his gaze. Neither of them spoke for a few seconds. Then Se-jin finally said, "Most people fear power." His voice was calm again, almost conversational. He took a slow step closer. "You challenged it." Amara didn't look impressed. She shifted her weight slightly and replied, "I defended someone." For a moment, Se-jin simply looked at her. Then the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. A faint smile. "Exactly." The word lingered in the quiet kitchen. Se-jin took another step closer, his voice lowering slightly. "Which is why I want you working for me, somewhere much more dangerous than a kitchen." Amara's brows drew together immediately. She straightened from the counter, her arms uncrossing slightly. "What do you mean?" Se-jin leaned closer, just enough that his voice dropped into something more private. "How would you like to run the kitchens for my entire empire?" Amara blinked. The words clearly hadn't been what she expected. "The restaurant?" she asked cautiously. Se-jin shook his head slowly. Pause. Then he added quietly, "Including the ones the public isn't supposed to know about." The sentence landed like a stone dropped into dark water. Amara stared at him, and suddenly she understood something that every employee in the building only whispered about. The Golden Dragon restaurant was not the center of Han Se-jin's empire. It was only the surface. Behind it existed other places. Private clubs, secret facilities, locations that didn't appear on any official business records, places where powerful people gathered far away from the public eye, places where the wrong kind of attention could become dangerous very quickly. Amara felt a chill run down her spine because she realized something terrifying. The restaurant had only been one small piece of the Mafia boss's world, and by slapping his wife, she had just stepped directly into the rest of it.
If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and lets you know when new videos drop. Lastly, and turn on notifications so you never miss a video.